Hey there, Underground Sessions podcast listeners. We have an amazing episode for you today. Katy Faust, who has been at our Underground Sessions events in the past. She is the leader of the organization Them Before Us. She's written a number of books. Her latest book is Pro-Child Politics. And really the theme of the book is how do we put kids at the center of everything when we're thinking about how we vote, the policies we put in place. I think you're going to find this to be a wonderful discussion, and we certainly encourage you to go get the book, check it out, become more informed. Stay tuned for our discussion, and we will see you in just a few minutes. All right, well, Katy, good to have you back on the Underground Sessions. It was a couple years ago we had you here in person, and I've been following your work. You've been doing a lot of really, really good stuff. You've written a couple books since you were here last time, and the one we're going to be talking about today is called Pro-Child Politics. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about Them Before Us? How did you get into that work? What's a little bit of your story for those that are not familiar with you?
Yeah, when people ask me, why are you doing this? How did you get into this work? What motivated you? The answer is really, it was a divine setup. I think I can look back on all different areas of my life that seemed disconnected, and God wove it together into not only something that is new, but something that I really think addresses some of the greatest harms that kids are facing in the 21st century. So I grew up with my married mom and dad. They divorced when I was 10, so I totally understand sort of the tumultuous nature of the post-divorce life for kids. Then my father dated and remarried. My mother repartnered with a woman, so I split time between their homes as I was growing up. So I am very comfortable with and familiar with the LGBT community, and love them. Like I'm very like I love them before they even tell me their pronouns. You know, just kind of been a part of my world for a long time. Then became a Christian, went to college, got married. Ended up working at a Chinese adoption agency while my husband was in seminary. Then we started ministry. Well, we've been doing ministry forever. So I've been in ministry for 30 years, pastor's wife for 25. A lot of that pastoring involved pre-marriage counseling, mid-marriage counseling, crisis marriage counseling, working with people dealing with infertility, same-sex attraction, unwanted singleness, gender dysphoria, losses, incredible losses, but also a lot of close contact with kids through youth ministry and understanding what they need, and the impact, the devastating, sometimes lifelong impact of mother or father loss or family fragmentation. Then God called us to adopt. So I've got 3 biological kids and 1 adopted son. And then God said, get into this business specifically about how children are being victimized in matters of marriage and family. So I started anonymous blogging that turned into a nonprofit in 2018, Them Before Us, where we seek to defend children. We defend their rights, their right to life, their right to their mother and father. These days, we're doing a lot of talking about children's rights to innocence and how the world is victimizing children through graphic and pornographic content in schools, online. We talk about children's bodies needing to be defended from transgender treatments, or the threat, the real genuine threat of having men in women's spaces. And then with our next book, our most recent book, Pro-Child Politics, we conscripted 19 subject matter experts to talk about their area of expertise through the lens of child protection. So Them Before Us, if you get online, if you Google Katy Faust, you're going to see a lot of information about marriage, family, same-sex parenting critiques, IVF, reproductive technologies. But you're also going to see that we are really talking about all of the sort of next-gen threats to children. And we need a new generation to rise up and defend kids.
Yeah. Well, it certainly seems like God was preparing you for the work that you're doing. So that whole story you gave before you said, well, and then God called me. Like God was doing all this work to get you to a place where you knew what you were talking about, or at least had a significant amount of experience to prepare you to talk significantly into those areas. So the book Pro-Child Politics, could you give us a quick overview of what does it mean to have a pro-child political outlook, and then I'd love to kind of walk through some of the topics that are very pertinent and provocative that you cover in the book.
Yeah, what we do at Them Before Us is on all matters of marriage and family specifically, we say you need to put them, the children, before us, the adults. You, the adults, have all kinds of identities, longings, losses, feelings, agendas. None of that should trump children's primary right to life and to be known and loved by their mother and father. You need to put them before us. You need to put kids first. And the amazing thing about that is when you prioritize kids, when you put them before us, you get not only good personal decisions, but you get the correct policy answers as well, with questions about when should divorce be allowed or permitted or promoted? Should we promote and normalize same-sex families? Should we endorse IVF or surrogacy? When you prioritize kids, you actually get the right answer to all those questions. So we hypothesized and then got to see the fruits of it, asking the question, what if we prioritized kids on every major issue, not just marriage and family, but questions about race or religious liberty or immigration or the environment or energy? What if you put them before us? What if you first prioritized kids? And you actually get the same thing. You get not only child protection, but you get national protection. You get not only child thriving, you get national thriving. There's something about putting them before us in all matters of politics that actually leads to great policy and social flourishing.
Good. Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've talked about here on issues that we feel most compelled to speak to are issues of human dignity, life, created order issues as it relates to marriage, family, sexuality, and I think this is kind of right up the alley. So if you wouldn't mind, could we just dive into some of these topics? You organized the book, and I should say you edited the book and you contributed a chapter, but there's a lot of authors that are speaking into these topics. The three main themes are cultural, economic, and national. And under cultural, you have topics like life, masculinity, femininity, family. You wrote the chapter on family, the race. Why don't we just talk about the implications for this pro-child political outlook in those different areas? Could you give us some tangible examples?
Yeah, there's so much there. I will say that
you don't have to cover everything, but maybe a couple just to whet our appetite.
Yeah, so what I did is I conscripted these subject matter experts to take what is very often
conscripted sounds like you forced them.
I'm sorry?
I said conscripted sounds like you forced them. Or I guess conscripted
there might have
them into
been
your
a little
army.
bit of coercion. I might have cracked the whip every now and then. But actually, the people that wrote these chapters, they some of them have written volumes. Some of them have been doing this for 20 or 30 years. So our life chapter is written by Abby Johnson. Our transgender chapter is written by Billboard Chris. Our masculinity chapter is written by Ken Harrison, the president of Promise Keepers. Our femininity chapter is written by Peachy Keenan, who wrote Domestic Extremist and is one of my favorite Twitter follows. Our pornography chapter is written by John Schweppe at the American Principles Project, which is spearheading the fight against underage porn use. Our race chapter is written by Delano Squires at the Heritage Foundation, who is one of the greatest thinkers, I think, on matters of marriage and family and race. He's got a book coming out hopefully next year. I can't remember what the title is, but he started a movement called Black Wives Matter, which is, the man is just a branding genius. And so what I did is I told all of these incredible authors to take what is sometimes a lifelong work, right, or decades of study, and narrow it down to 3,000 words. And I told each of them to follow the exact same formula. Number one, give me the story of a child who was harmed because we believed the lies about femininity, or we believed the lies about life, or we believed the lies about race, or we believed the lies about transgenderism. Then tell me the lies. What are the lies about each of those subjects? And outline them for me. I think a lot of us know it. We know the my body, my choice. We know things like, masculinity is toxic. We know things like from the family strain, love makes a family. Biology doesn't matter. Men don't matter. Women don't matter. Love, that's all that matters. So we identify those specific lies. And then I had every author say, now tell me how those lies harm kids. What is the direct and tangible impact? What is the harm to kids when we believe those lies? Then I had each author outline the truth of masculinity or pornography or life, and then had them explain how child protection flows from believing and acting on those truths. And then I said at the very, very end, show me somebody that's doing it right. Who is actually fighting on behalf of children's life or children's innocence from pornography or children's family, or the idea that proper understanding of race. Who is doing this right? How can we follow them? So that is sort of the framework that you're going to get. Is it actually functions in some ways as a primer on all of the major issues that we vote about, that we debate about, that we discuss, that we tweet about. And it's in that sense very helpful. So it's hard to sort of summarize what's going on in the cultural stream because we've got 7 different experts talking about 7 different areas. But I will tell you what you're going to find is they are going to identify really the fundamentals of what it means to be human, because that's really what the cultural issues are about. And then kind of identify what are the lies and the pitfalls we fall into, what are the truths, and then how do we act on those truths in ways that protect kids.
That's good. Now, the second area you talk about is the economic implications, and maybe here there's some specific examples. I see we got topics like the economy, taxes, debt. And debt, speaking of, we continue to just add more and more to that. And at some level, that at some point in the future, the bill is going to come due, and it's going to be my kids, your kids, that are going to be severely impacted by that as it relates to things like Social Security and actually the other major problem is that people are not having as many kids as they used to, which is going to have huge economic implications in the future. What were some of the specific topics that they talked about in that section?
Yeah, I actually just interviewed Phil Kerpen yesterday, the guy who authored our debt chapter. And what I really appreciate about his framing is he doesn't talk about, that we've got out of control, debt to GDP ratio, which we do. He doesn't just say this is unsustainable. He actually frames this in moral terms. He says what we are doing right now is immoral. It is unethical. He calls it fiscal child abuse. I mean, the way that we are leveraging and shuffling mountains of debt onto the shoulder of children who didn't agree to it, aren't going to benefit from it. A child born today will be born on the day that they're born owing $78,000 of debt. It's going to be close to $250,000 by the time they're 20, 25. It is absolutely not just irresponsible, it's immoral what's going on. And so that is what I'm talking about when we look at each of these chapters. So we had the economy chapter written by Christopher Bedford, who's now at the Blaze, but he has been a long time
I like
writer.
him. I follow him. Yeah.
Oh, he's so good.
Quite funny.
And then our taxes chapter. I have a hard time wading through taxes sometimes. I mean, I'm not necessarily the economic issues girl.
I mean, you don't just sit down and read tax law and get excited.
No, I don't. And I actually believed a lot of the tax lies that were outlined in the chapter. So I got a man named Grover Norquist to write the taxes chapter. And anybody that's been in any level connected to DC politics are going to be like, Grover's name is sort of synonymous with tax reform. I mean, his organization is Americans for Tax Reform. And he has actually done more to reform taxes and highlight the abuse of Americans at the hands of rampant taxation. I mean, he's a legend. He's a legend. So then Phil wrote our debt chapter. A guy named Neil Chatterjee wrote the energy chapter. And Neil has a bio that's so long that he doesn't even have an association with his name. He's been in and out of presidential administrations and think tanks. But I will tell you, his energy chapter opened my eyes. I'm like, how do I go from a woman that doesn't know much about energy to being like, over my dead body, you're going to pass these kinds of energy requirements that are going to actually siphon off the conditions that children need to thrive. And then we included a chapter on ESG and DEI, which you think, well, what does this have to do with kids at all? And the answer is it has everything to do with kids, both in terms of how it is promoted and marketed and manifested through things like child programming, but what it does if you actually implement ESG and DEI ratings, you will tank companies, states, and entire countries. I mean, ESG and DEI is upstream of so many of the harmful lies that people outlined in our book. And Justin Danoff, who was there at the founding of Strive, Vivek Ramaswamy's organization, really makes it clear, you want ESG, DEI, you're absolutely going to harm children in ways that they might not be able to recover from.
Good. Well, that's already a section that I want to read through. Thanks so much for capturing that. So the last one is the national issues, and one of them I noticed, obviously, education is a big one. I noticed that you have religious liberty on here, which might not seem intuitive to people, but that's as a Baptist, that's something we very much care about. What's going on in the national topics you have here?
One of the things I really wanted the most in this book was religious liberty, because I think that there's misunderstandings about a lot of these issues, but the religious liberty chapter was so important to me because if you get religious liberty wrong, when we get religious liberty wrong, it is because we have got humanity wrong. We get human nature wrong. We get the understanding of what it means to be human wrong. And we think about religious liberty as just, well, this is for cake bakers and this is for florists. It's not. If you get religious liberty wrong, you actually impair humans, but especially children's ability to become fully human. It is very important for people to be able to ask these ultimate questions. Why am I here? What is the nature of the world? Who is God? And when you restrict religious liberty, you actually choke people and children out of the ability to become who they are really supposed to be, which is beings beyond just an economic unit. So I really love the chapter that Ashley McGuire authored. She's incredible. She also is formerly employed by the Beckett Fund, which is one of the law firms that is tasked with defending religious liberty. Tiffany Justice, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, wrote my education chapter. And if there's anybody that's doing like the on-the-ground work of battling back the abuses of the, not teachers, but the teachers' unions, and the way that education is actually working against our children in so many ways, this is the woman that was qualified to do it. Digital technology, this is important, like beyond just damaging content like pornography. We wanted to have a chapter specifically about how digital technology and the ways that it is sort of infiltrating our world, how that impacts our humanity and how we think about it in all of these different spheres. Maria Bear wrote that chapter. She is the co-host of Breakpoint This Week, Colson Center. Colson Center, I think, is the best Christian worldview organization, and we really needed somebody who knew the answer to what it means to be human to write our digital technology chapter, because we are seeing the blurring of the lines between what it means to be human and what it means to be a machine, and she really brings that out, especially as it relates to what our kids need in terms of thriving and protection. It was important for me also to have a chapter on the environment, because unfortunately that topic has been so co-opted by progressives. And so I tapped the president of the American Conservation Coalition, really the only conservative environmental group that's out there, to write about why our current policies on environment harm kids and the environment. Like, nobody is being helped by our radical sort of green energy minded or Green New Deal kind of mindset. So that I learned a lot in that chapter too. We have a foreign policy chapter by Dan Caldwell, and he has been in the defense space, former Marines, for a long time, and he really sort of walks us through the two lies about foreign policy: one, that we need to be isolationists, and two, that we need to be the world's policemen. So that was very clarifying for me. We have a chapter on policing, because there's been a lot of lies about policing, that they are targeting Black people, that we need to defund them, that social workers can do the jobs of policemen, and kids have died. That results in child death. And Ari does a great job of drawing that direct connection between defunding the police and degrading the police and child protection and child thriving. And then finally, what might be the chapter that I think is, I don't want to say the most relevant because they all are, but Laura Reese at the Heritage Foundation wrote our immigration chapter. And I'll tell you what, if you care about child protection, you care about a secure border, because what has been going on over the last 4 years is nothing short of state-endorsed child trafficking. The cartels have now taken control of the border. They don't care about child well-being. Now, what we are seeing is simply a pipeline from the cartels directly to traffickers, because we don't have a way to vet, screen, and secure a lot of the especially unaccompanied minor children coming across the border. So I have benefited a lot from the 3,000 words of each of these experts. And I think that the rest of us, if we really want to be well-informed and if we want to protect kids, hopefully we'll find this to be a helpful resource.
Yeah, well, it certainly sounds like it is, and I would definitely encourage folks to go out and get it. I've had it for a couple weeks. I've just had other pressing issues, but I do plan to make my way through it here very soon. So, Katy, maybe another question. We're in an election season, and some folks might pick up this book and say, "Well, that's just conservatives talking." What would you say to your readers who might have a liberal outlook, and how would you persuade them to kind of say that this book is beneficial to them, or even if they have a conservative outlook? And maybe to color that, I think that probably the two most animating issues in this election season have been, of course, border security and immigration, which you mentioned, and I will go back to the first chapter on the life issue, because neither party is really great on the life issue right now. Certainly, Democrats, lots to criticize there, but also current Republican platforms stripped away a lot of that, highlighting things like IVF. Even President Trump's wife just came out basically pro-abortion. So how should we think through those issues, and how can your book be helpful on that?
Well, ultimately, I think that what happens when you elevate children, when you say their rights, their needs, their well-being is going to be the most important value when it comes to making policy. There is something interesting that happens when you say, we're going to think first about the next generation. What happens is you get true, I would say, pure conservatism. There's some kind of connection between conservative policy and conservative outcomes, and valuing something beyond the immediate and valuing something beyond simply what adults want. But I will say that my friends on the left are very often incredibly well motivated, and they do care about kids, and they do want effective policy, and they do want to care for the environment. And I would say that unfortunately, a lot of the ways that we have lied about those topics lead to child harm, when that's never the intention, or very seldom the intention, especially with kind of the on the ground people that identify as progressive or lean left. A lot of times they do it because they think that the current immigration policy is actually good for immigrants, or good for our economy, or good for our current citizens. And so I don't think that's a problem of motivation, but I do think that we need to be more concerned with actually doing good than just feeling good. And unfortunately, what is going on, I'd say in the Democrat Party specifically, is an elevation of what adults want, their own feelings, agendas, sexual identities, longings, or losses. That is king. Adult desire is at the very, very top of the hierarchy when it comes to what is ruling progressives and shaping their platforms and candidates right now. And if that is the highest value, if what adults want is the highest value, it is always kids that are going to suffer, and it is always kids who are going to have to sacrifice. So I don't think it's an issue of motivation, or, somebody loves kids, somebody doesn't love kids. It is really how are we going to order our priorities? And if you put adults at the top, kids are not going to, they're not going to be protected. Sometimes they won't even make the list. If you put kids at the top, every adult at some point is going to have to sacrifice, but you will end up getting child protection, and that leads to national protection and national thriving.
Good. I think that's a great way of framing it. It's not an issue of motivation, but it is a question of what are your policies actually doing and accomplishing. I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So good. Well, maybe here the last question I would ask you is what other resources would you recommend? Obviously, I think people should buy your book and they should read your book. But what are some organizations maybe you would point people to, and what actions would you recommend people taking if they want to become more pro-child in their political voting patterns and actions? Yeah.
Well, it's hard to read 3,000 words on 19 different subjects about things that are all actually very pressing. Really, I would say many of the kind of questions and answers that we're asking in this book are existential. Who are children? What are we as a nation? What is it going to take for us to survive? Not even thrive, but just survive. And so there is a lot to unpack here. And the conclusion of the book is written by Josh Wood, our executive director, who sort of helps you to sort of digest and figure out what's next. What can I do? We don't want to paralyze you with, oh my gosh, there's problems everywhere and it's so overwhelming. He really sort of laid out sort of a step-by-step of like, first do this, take the next step and do this, have to do with like, stop supporting things that are actually damaging to kids. Start kind of getting to the place where you're just following good sources of information, then figure out what area of life you think, okay, I can make a difference here. And then bring in, your team, start educating people around you, contributing to and working towards maybe that one or two area that you think this is something I'm really passionate about and I want to make a difference. In terms of other resources, I'll tell you one of the other strategies that we had is obviously you cannot know everything you need to know about foreign policy in 3,000 words. Which is why we made sure that anybody that we tapped for these chapters had YouTube channels, books, all kinds of other resources for you to go and learn more about foreign policy from Dan Caldwell. If you were like, well, I want to know more about femininity, Peachy Keenan wrote a book on this, and you'll laugh your way through, and you're going to have a very good idea of what it means to truly be a strong, bold, beautiful, modern day woman. So that's one of the other things is like, it'll be hard to say, go to these resources. I would say that the authors in many ways are the resources and who are going to be able to then direct you to things that they have written, other work that they've been involved in. So that was another reason why we did it this way is we can't give you everything in one place, but we will give you the people who can get you more information if you need it.
Wonderful. Well, I think that was a great summary. Hopefully that did whet your appetite to go and buy and read this book. And of course, it might be helpful to you if you do that this month as we consider the election that's upcoming, not just on the national level, but perhaps also on the local level as well. It's important that you know what your elected representatives are doing and representing and advocating for these policies if you certainly care about kids. So, Katy, thanks so much for being on here. It's always just super beneficial to talk to you. I hope that your book sales increase very, very much, and thank you for the good work that you're doing at the Them Before Us and in your author sphere of everything that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Bob, and thanks for being one of the brave pastors who are willing to wade into issues that are perceived as political, but they actually have to do with true Christianity. Like this. All of these spheres, they belong to the church. We need to be shaping culture, yes. And it should not be the other way around.
Yeah, and that is a good word, a good exhortation. So thank you so much for joining us for the Underground Session podcast. The book is Pro-Child Politics. Katy Faust, check her out at Them Before Us, and we will see you next time on the Underground Sessions podcast.